This is the Enter Sadmen podcast. Every rock and metal album you should own. Reviewed, rated, and ranked.
Hello again. Welcome to the show. Welcome to episode 76 of the Enter Sadmen podcast. Good to have your company as always. My name's Steve. With me are Mark and Richard, the three of us poised as ever, like coiled springs waiting to embark on the next leg of our journey, our musical odyssey, which, as all you regular listeners will know, is to create and craft the ultimate hard rock and heavy metal Hall of Fame. Yes, that's the idea. This kind of league table of excellence, the best albums from this genre, from our golden age, which we have decreed is between 1970 and 1995. And what we do is we review three albums per episode. We review them, we rate them track by track, and then we rank them, deposit them in said Hall of Fame, which you can discover all about at our website, www.entersadmen.co.uk. So that's it. That's what we do. And this, as I say, is episode 76. We pick our albums based on a theme randomly selected by our randomizer, which is the Tico Torres tombola of topics and themes. And this week's theme, well, it's not quite rewriting history, is it? But it's more kind of rethinking our past. We've tentatively called it "You've Got Another Think Coming." But yeah, it's going back to an album or a band, but I think we've done albums that we have a different view on now than when we first played it. Is that fair? Is that what we've done, Mark?
It's how has the passage of time changed our view of three albums that we either liked or not back in the day?
Yeah, so let's reveal. The grand reveal. What albums have we chosen? Richard, do you want to go first? Tell us what you brought to the party.
Yeah, I bought an album by Van Halen, the later Van Halen, when Sammy Hagar was with them. This was an album I wasn't interested by default because I just couldn't get on with Van Halen with Sammy Hagar in them. I loved Sammy Hagar, love him to bits, loved Van Halen. But somehow the two of them together never really properly got to me until it was Mark. Mark played me this album and I thought, maybe I should give them another listen. And the album's Balance. It was actually their final album with Sammy Hagar. So I was very late to that party. Since then, I bought it and I've loved it.
I'm looking forward to that conversation. Only because I'm in the same camp as you with the sort of Van Halen, Van Hagar bit. So anyway, yeah, Mark, where do you go? What are you going to play for us?
So one of, if anyone who's listened to this podcast since the beginning will know that one of my favourite albums of all time is Heaven and Hell by Black Sabbath, and the Dio version of Black Sabbath, which probably makes me a heathen or a heretic in the eyes of Black Sabbath fans, the true purists. But things are what they are. That was my favourite Black Sabbath album. And I bought Mob Rules and I thought that wasn't quite as good. And then the world turned upside down. It went half-ass crazy and Ian Gillan joined the band. So I bought Born Again, thinking the world's greatest vocalist joins the world's heaviest metal band. This is going to be great. And I quickly came to the conclusion it wasn't. And I was in very good company because I think pretty much most of the rest of the world, including Ian Gillan, didn't think it was very good either. But over the course of the time that we've been doing this podcast, nearly 2 years now, I've listened to Born Again a couple of times, or listened to bits of it a couple of times, looking at stuff to do in other episodes that we've done in the past. And actually, my view of it has changed. And I'll tell you how it's changed when we come on to talk about it.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, put it this way, I'd be surprised if it hadn't changed, having enjoyed the company of Mr. Gillan and Black Sabbath over the last week or two. So anyway, we'll have that conversation in a bit. Me, regular listeners will know, or those who listen to whichever episode it was way back in time will know that I'm a massive Ratt fan. And their first two albums were gargantuan, as I've extolled their virtues many, many times before. Unfortunately, what followed was two piles of shite. So album 5, therefore, was always going to be an interesting one. And Detonator, album 5 by Ratt. Bought it, thought, yeah, okay. Slapped it on and thought, which way is this going to go? Are we going to get out of the cellar here? We're going to get reach for the sky. It was a tough play for a few years, if I'm honest. Lots of good, lots of bad. But I've warmed to it. There were a couple of tracks on there that I would take to my grave with. Any desert island, put them on my headstone, the works. And coming back to it, I've just realised actually that it's a lot better than I've remembered. I honestly think that. So, but what you two think? Well, we'll wait and find out. But I'm so pleased I've done it, and I stand by what I said about the previous two albums because they were awful. Detonator by Ratt. That's the third album on episode 76. So let's have a little play of a few of the bits from these three albums. Then we'll come back and we'll talk about all three of them.
So there you go, another varied listening list for this episode. And as always, we do these album reviews in chronological order. A little bit of a spread this week. We're not all in one decade. Van Halen was 95. That goes last. Ratt's Detonator 1990. That goes second. And we start with 1983, the year that Born Again by Black Sabbath was recorded. Mark.
We've been friends for a long time, haven't we? We've been friends for a long time, and at various stages of our lives, at the point, in this Venn diagram where we've all intersected with each other, there have been times when we've gone to the pub and we've got a bit pissed and we've done some stupid stuff. So when Ian Gillan was invited to go for a drink with Tony Iommi and Geezer Butler, you would have been forgiven for thinking that was just a bit of a drink between three old stagers from heavy metal's golden years. They were around at the same time, Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, slugging it out in the early 70s to become the godfathers of heavy metal. We've had that conversation back in episode 3. Anyway, Ian Gillan turns up at, I think it's the Bear Inn in Oxford, where he meets Birmingham's finest, Tony Iommi and Geezer Butler, and things get a bit messy. In fact, they get very messy. So messy, in fact, that Gillan has to be poured into a taxi, which takes him home. And he wakes up the next morning with the phone ringing, and it's his agent on the phone. And his agent says, Ian, when you make significantly serious decisions about your career, I think it would be a good idea if you talk to me first. And Gillan goes, what the hell are you talking about? He had no recollection of the previous night. He's like, well, hold on. I don't know what you're talking about. And he said, well, apparently you've just agreed to join Black Sabbath. So this was obviously a state of affairs concocted by the three of them over a few pints. After the event, Geezer Butler says, how the hell does that work? Because he's now thinking what all the rest of us are thinking, going, can't really hear this working. But nevertheless, Gillan's just folded the Gillan Band. Black Sabbath have just fired Ronnie James Dio. There is a vacancy in front of the microphone, and Ian Gillan steps into it. And the deal apparently was 1 year, one album, one tour, and we'll see where it goes from there. And the result of this is 1983's Born Again album. An album that, well, see, I interviewed Ian Gillan in about 89, 90 for a newspaper that I was working on. And I asked him about this because he had always said that he heard the master tapes of Born Again as he was driving up the M4, and he was listening to it on a cassette. So he'd heard the kind of the early mixes of it, and he'd thrown them out of the window. Apparently, they're still lying somewhere in the verge on the hard shoulder of the M4. Who knows? But he threw them out. He was so disgusted with the way the album turned out that he couldn't bear to listen to it. Tony Iommi and Geezer Butler say that the band was touring in the Far East when the album came out. They didn't actually hear it until it was released and realised it was a complete dog's breakfast from a production point of view. But anywho, the album comes out, and it comes out on August the 7th, 1983, and this little hairy Grebo from Nebworth goes out and buys it.
Opening album sleeve notes.
It was recorded in May of 93, and to be honest with you, the story about how it was recorded is far more interesting than the album in many ways, but we'll come on to that. It released on Vertigo, 41 minutes and 4 seconds long, produced by Black Sabbath and a guy called Robin Black at the Manor Studios in Oxfordshire, owned by Richard Branson. And Branson is complicit, in fact, in breaking his own windows as he runs around throwing stones through them with Ian Gillan at some point. So the previous album is Mob Rules with Ronnie James Dio, if you ignore the Live Evil album, which is ultimately the album that saw Dio shown the door because he kept sneaking back into the studio in the dead of night to make changes to the production. And the next one was Seventh Star. So this is the classic Black Sabbath lineup of Bill Ward, who's brought back to do drums for the album. Doesn't make it onto the tour. That's Bev Bevan, formerly of ELO, because Bill Ward is so stressed out by the recording experience that he goes back on the bottle, having been sober for a couple of years. Geezer Butler on bass and Tony Iommi on lead guitar, and obviously Ian Gillan on vocals. And they are joined by Jeff Nichols on keyboards, who we have already talked about on a couple of albums, Dio and Y&T in particular, over the last few months. This album reached number 4 in the UK, stayed on the chart for 7 weeks. It went to 39 in America. It says it's got 9 tracks. It's really only got 7 because 2 of them are very, very short. But anyway, the track listing: Trashed, Stonehenge, an instrumental; Disturbing the Priest, The Dark, an instrumental of less than 1 minute; Zero the Hero. And then Digital Bitch on side 2, Born Again, Hotline, and Keep It Warm. We'll talk about how these songs came into being, because pretty much the album tells the story of what was going on at the time it was made. But I have really, really enjoyed this album. I think it is actually a really good album when you just ignore the fact that it's Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath stopped sounding like Black Sabbath when Ozzy Osbourne left in 79. So they hadn't sounded like Black Sabbath for 4 years when this comes out. So taken on its own merits, I think this is a great album. But what do you two think?
Well, there are stories I read that the intention was that they weren't going to make a Black Sabbath album. That actually they had plans that it was going to be, an Iommi, Butler, Ward, Gillan project. That actually they were just interested in making music together. I mean, if your story is true, to getting absolutely ratted in the pub, how will they actually remember that? Who knows? And that I kind of get. That actually they thought, well, you've not got a band at the moment. We've not got a singer. Why don't we have a bit of fun? Because I was falling into that trap of, this doesn't sound like Black Sabbath. And once I started to think about, okay, well, did they have the opportunity to make some music just between the 4 of them? Yeah, there's some very interesting stuff on here. There's some stuff I'm not too bothered with, but there's a few very good tracks. And and I've got into it. It took a while, but I think towards the end I was getting it. Enjoying it mostly.
I can feel the waves of enthusiasm washing over me as you're speaking there. I just feel the love coming, just flowing off you. Steve,
talk to me, baby. Just talk to me. I love this. I've loved this. I'm telling you. Sometimes you always think you're kind of out of touch with the world, the rest of the world. And I'm looking at reading all the reviews and that, and I'm thinking. I remember at school, I had a real soft spot for an American tennis player called Kathy Rinaldi, and no one else did. And I just thought, is it me? She's lovely. But anyway, and I'm at that stage again. This is my Kathy Rinaldi moment. And I'm thinking, why are all these reviews the way they are? I found this quite easy to assimilate because I've got no Sabbath baggage. I wasn't a Sabbath fan particularly. All these reviews saying, the worst Sabbath album ever. I've seen that. I'm sure you've seen that many, many times. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. But what's it like as an album? Forget the Sabbath bit. What's it like as an album? And I actually find it easy to distance this from Black Sabbath because of the man at the mic, who doesn't sound like the bloke from Black Sabbath. He sounds like the bloke from Ian Gillan band. And to that, you know what I mean? And to that end, I love it because this is as much a Gillan album as it is a Sabbath album, as far as I'm concerned. It's funny that even Gillan described it. What was that? He described himself as the worst singer Sabbath ever had.
Yes.
Because he wasn't a leather and antichrist kind of guy. He wasn't Ozzy and he wasn't Ronnie. But I just go back to what I say. Had you not known about Sabbath's past, past, had you not known about Gillan's past, had you just heard this album blind without knowing anything, surely you'd think it was great. Because I do. The music on this is absolutely pounding. I just think it's brilliant. Really enjoyed it. I mean, what that fucking instrumental's about, I do not know. But...
Well, I quite like Stonehenge, but we'll get on to that. But I think you've hit the nail on. I think you've hit the nail on the head, because the guitars and the drums and the bass are all Black Sabbath. I mean, they are as heavy as fuck.
Yes, yeah.
And then you've got Gillan. Not only his vocal linguistics, but his vocal gymnastics, but also his lyrical gymnastics.
Yeah,
all of that tongue-in-cheek stuff, the play on words. I mean, we talked before, didn't we, about the way he kind of mashes up words, but they absolutely sum up kind of the feeling that he's trying to get across, and he does this here. Well, we'll come on to it, particularly in Zero the Hero. But lyrically, this is nothing like Black Sabbath. Musically, it's Black Sabbath all over. And that's probably why it splits opinion, I guess. I'm pleased you both liked it, or at least got on with it, because it was only going to go one or two ways, really. But should we get
neutrality is not an option, is it?
But let's get on and listen to it, and we can talk through some of these things in a bit more depth. So the album kicks off with a track called Trashed, which is actually just a narrative of this crazy-ass race that the band were having in the grounds of the Manor Studios when Ian Gillan nicked Bill Ward's Ford Granada, brand new Ford Granada, and raced it around the racetrack before totaling it. He was absolutely leathered again. I mean, he really was trashed. But this track is this is the track. It was on every tape, every compilation tape I had at the time. I've always loved this track. The riff is absolutely relentless. And Geezer Butler's bass as well just goes right through you, doesn't it? It's a fantastic track. Fantastic opening.
I didn't know it was a Ford Granada. I never knew that. That adds to the story. If you showed a kid today a Ford Granada and give them this kind of madman racing story, you just think, what, in that?
Apparently they were all given brand new Ford Granadas as part of the record deal.
Okay, yeah, cool. Mate, this is the one. You know this is the one because you played it to me as the first track you played on this album. But you didn't need to go any further because I was hooked from the minute you played this to me first time. I just thought, that's rock. What a riff. What a riff. What's not to like about this? Well, the PMRC found something not to like about it, didn't they? But isn't it on their list?
Yeah.
I mean, what? Yeah. What, drink driving, presumably? Or driving a Ford Granada? Don't know. One of them.
Well,
I presume it's the Granada.
Also, it's the Granada. It's definitely the Granada.
No one else could sing this, could they? At this speed, this power, and this pitch. Crumbsy he's got a great big pair of lungs, hasn't he? These lines he's singing are so long. This goes off at 100 miles an hour. Don't think it's my favourite track on the album, but it's up there. But yeah, I mean, let's be honest. It is the production on this and the whole album is fucking poor. It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, the one that this track has lost marks because still to this day, the guitar solo hurts my ears. Not because it's necessarily a bad solo, but the production on it is awful.
But ignoring the production, it is still a wicked guitar solo.
It is.
Yeah. So then, I know we're not marking it, but we've got to talk about Stonehenge. We've got to talk about Stonehenge because if you've watched Spinal Tap, then there is a part of Spinal Tap that owes itself to this album, because they write this song, which is very atmospheric. I actually really like it. It's like Jean-Michel Jarre meets the devil in a car park somewhere, and this is the music they make together. So I absolutely love this as an instrumental. I think it's a great way of getting into the next track, which is called Disturbing the Priest. So as part of the tour, the Born Again tour, they commission, what Geezer Butler said was, he was asked, what size do you want Stonehenge? Because they decided they'd have this kind of Stonehenge set. And Geezer Butler goes, life size. The thing's so fucking huge. They can't get it into any venue on the tour. So they have to only use half of it, and half the size and half the actual thing. So it is so Spinal Tap that Spinal Tap just take it and reverse it. So Spinal Tap, it's tiny, absolutely tiny. It's only about a foot tall, isn't it? Whereas actually in real life, this thing was just monstrous, and they couldn't get it in. Even the biggest venues, they couldn't get it on the stage. Just fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. No,
the other thing is, I mean, it does actually sound like the music that they're playing when Nigel Tufnell is doing his intro. What is it? No one knows where they came from.
But take away the Spinal Tap link, and I love the way that heartbeat goes into Disturbing the Priest, which starts off with a traditional trademark Ian Gillan scream, laugh, manic
cackle.
Laugh. Cackle. And obviously, the backstory to Disturbing the Priest is that they were recording this album in the sort of mid-spring when it was very warm. So they had all of the doors and windows open at the Manor Studios while they're kind of rehearsing and recording. So loud were they that they were disturbing services at the church up the road. So they're rehearsing one day or recording, and this vicar turns up at the door asking them if they wouldn't please mind turning it down, because it was actually disturbing choir practice up the road. So this is Disturbing the Priest. Churchgoers took offence in quite big numbers, to the point where they were run out of town, I think in Mexico, because it was so sacrilegious. So this is Disturbing the Priest, and this is, well, we're going to use the phrase heavy as fuck a lot, because this is really, really heavy. I absolutely love Geezer Butler. Can I just bow down? Because he is just astonishing on this track.
I think Bill Ward as well.
Yes.
Welcome back, Bill, because he
true.
Back from the dark side. Is there a darker side than Black Sabbath? I mean, battling the drink demons. This is just... Ian Gillan was born to sing death metal, by the way. He should have done it far earlier in his career. This is just, heavy as fuck. You've done the review for me, and that's how it'll appear on the website. I mean, that's what it is. This is just brilliant. It's a modern update, isn't it, of some of their sort of dubious stuff from their first couple of albums, but just done benefiting from having Gillan at the mic, as far as I'm concerned. Those trademark screams and everything. Just a brilliant track. Brilliant. And the first of several of this style. I love Trashed, but this style is what makes the album to me.
And this would be this is the track where I go, I think this might just be my favourite track on the album.
And then, of course, it's followed by one which might just be my favourite as well, on very similar ground. It's a sensational end to a side. Those two tracks, forget the dark.
Yes, it's disturbing, isn't it? Because despite the light-hearted making fun of this priest that turns up, there's some really anti-religious sentiment on it, isn't there? The devil and the priest can't exist if one goes away. Watch out for religion. It's thought-provoking and disturbing, quite progressive, I think.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's very true, actually. It is a very progressive track. They can't exist without each other. So, it is thought-provoking. You're right. It leads into another instrumental, which is The Dark. Arguably, Steve, you might think the instrumental here is better than The Dark by Metal Church. Because you weren't a big fan. Right?
Not a big fan.
45 seconds of kind of quite disturbing noises. And then Zero the Hero just winds in, doesn't it? It's like this hellish soundscape of, well, I don't know, just guitars wailing and the bass running and this kind of sort of almost prison style chain gang drum beat going on in the background. and then it just drops into this relentlessly doomy riff. And I love this track. I love Gillan's lyrical cleverness on it. I think it's just brilliant. This first side, I just think is almost, production aside, as pieces of music, ignoring the instrumentals, these 3 tracks, almost flawless.
Here. Absolutely, I echo that. This is just, Christ, Disturbing the Priest was bleak. This is every bit as bleak, isn't it? Bloody hell. But you can see why a lot of modern day death metal bands love this. Reading the reviews from some of those, modern bands, this must be a kind of, touchstone piece of death metal, basically. God, the menace. Geezer Butler said it was his favourite off the album, and I was going to say I'm with him on that. My marks might suggest, but listen, I love it. Unremittingly heavy. It's just a weight.
Well, Richard, you always use the word heft, and this has just got weight, hasn't it?
I think what makes it is you've got Iommi playing very low, presumed is detuned guitar, and Butler at the same time. So you've just got this rolling, thumping riff, then the big thumps of the drums behind it. This is the closest riff to Sabbath on the album.
Anybody heard any keyboards from Jeff Nichols yet?
No, I was surprised when you said it.
Yes.
So anyway, Zero the Hero brings side 1 to a close, and you flip it over. And let's just put it out here now. Arguably, side 2 isn't as strong, but I think it's got some really interesting moments on it. Not least the title track and the final track, Keep It Warm.
No.
What?
Side 2 is very simple. It's got 3 bangers and then the title track. That's where I am with it.
Okay. Well, let's go through them. I mean, Keep It Warm, I think it was Geezer Butler or Bill Ward. Bill Ward said that he watched Gillan performing this and suddenly understood why he was such an amazing singer. Mm-hmm. But we'll come on to that. It closes out the album. We start off, though, with Digital Bitch, which it's fairly tried and trusted lyrical territory for Ian Gillan, isn't it? Because it's a bit like knocking at your back door as well. It's all about a rich woman who is obviously a bitch. It's pretty heavy, but it's fast. It's not as fast as Trashed, I don't think. It's not as good as Trashed. No. So, as a side opener, it doesn't quite scale those heights, but it's quite catchy. It's my least favourite track oddly enough, on this side, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I love that riff. Love the pace. This actually is a classic example of the type of track that Sabbath probably would never have written. And Geezer Butler certainly would never have written lyrically. Her big fat daddy was a money machine. He made a fortune from computers. She's got more money than I've ever seen, but she's a greedy, emotional looter. I mean, it could only have come from Gillan, that, couldn't it? And I think they were all quite uneasy. Gillan had basically just rewritten their subject matter. Gillan had just suddenly gone, no. It's time for some poetry, folks, and it's time for my mind to just go the way I go. And it would have felt very different to them. After, well over a decade of doing what they did. To me, it's hilarious. I still like this song. I take your point, but...
It's quite interesting because Geezer Butler, I get the impression Geezer Butler is quite a hard guy to please.
Probably.
I think he got roundly fucked off with the kind of wizards and witches and rainbows and towers of the Dio era. I think he loved the music, but lyrically, I think he and Sabbath parted company emotionally during the Dio years. And I think he was quite intolerant of the lyrical content of this album as well. Because what he wanted to do is go back to that sort of the black walls of my bedroom kind of approach to heavy metal. So interesting. Richard?
I think this is my lowest score. Got really annoyed by the muffled production on it. It's a Speed King ripoff for me. This is Black Sabbath do Deep Purple and fail.
I hear that. Well, okay, Steve, track 2, side 2, the title track. Tell me what you don't like.
It's just a dirge. It's just an absolute dirge. It's just Candlemas, but even more boring. That's where I am with Born Again. I'm getting so little out of it.
It's because you've come into this mentally saying, it's just the Ian Gillan band with some different backing people. So it's not surprising. It really isn't surprising.
Is this not Born Again's Planet Caravan?
No, I didn't like that. Quite possibly so. Yeah, no, that would make sense.
But I think you're right. I mean, this is doom metal. It's moody. It's atmospheric. I mean, the other thing I thought about was it's almost, have they invented grunge 10 years earlier?
That is a really good question, isn't it? Because it is quite grungy, but it's good. There's a slight difference.
And
it
the other thing, Steve, is one other issue I have with this album is that Gillan is doing most of it at 100 miles an hour. What I love about the Gillan band's albums, and also what he does with Deep Purple, is his light and shade, and the fact that he really does rein it back in some songs, because he's as good there as he is at his limit. And so it was quite nice to hear the variation in how he was singing in this song. With a lot of the others, I got a little bit tired. The fact that he was at the top of his range all the time and singing really fast.
I've got no problem with that. I just don't. Yeah, it's just the song, really. I mean, I see everything that you're seeing, or hear everything you're hearing, but it's just not for me. Incidentally, before you move on, while we're talking about Born Again, we need to talk about the album cover, don't we? Isn't that part of the reason why it was loathed pretty much everywhere? It's rated one of the worst album covers of all time, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm not entirely sure why, to be honest. I mean, it's a rip-off. It's been used on another album. Actually, while you guys are talking about the cover, I'm going to find out which one it is.
Well, I'll tell you what. While you're doing that, then I'm going to tell you, because I had to look up Kerrang's top 50 worst album covers ever, which was compiled last year. So plenty to go at. And Born Again is still in there, and so are the Scorpions twice. You can guess those, I'm sure.
The Animal Magnetism and Love Drive, I presume.
Gotcha. Rush once.
Hemispheres.
Did I just hear?
Yes, Hemispheres. Yeah. Kerrang's top 50 worst album covers. So Love Drive, Animal Magnetism was in there. Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
Exodus is Bonded by Blood was the surprise for me. But anyway.
I mean, is this Kerrang suddenly getting PC?
Yeah. Well, I tell you what I'll ask you both to do now, and indeed anyone who's listening, is go onto Google Images and the pick of their top 50 and type in the Californian new metalers Adema, Adema. And the album is Topple the Giants. And that is the winner. That is the absolute award winner as far as I'm concerned.
So not Metal Tit, then?
No, that's right. They were on. I saw that.
It was on Depeche Mode's 12-inch single, New Life, this image.
Oh, okay.
And it was reworked for Black Sabbath. I think it was done, basically, it was commissioned at the last minute by Steve Crusher Jewell, I think, the Kerrang photographer,
yeah.
who said that he basically prevaricated, did absolutely fuck all with it until about the day before it was due to be delivered, and then just doctored this image, gave it a purple cover. It's Black Sabbath's second purple cover, isn't it, after Master of Reality, and submitted it, and Tony Iommi loved it. Gillan said he vomited when he saw it.
That's right.
And Bill Ward said, I didn't have anything to do with the cover. When I first saw it, I hated it.
Well, that was the point. They didn't need another stick to be beaten with, did they? So, but they've come up with an album cover that is controversial and bound to be, divide opinions as well. So it's kind of a sort of an own goal, really, isn't it?
I don't understand.
So which Adema album was it?
Topple the Giants.
Topple the Giants. That looks fine to me. What's wrong with that?
You've been looking at too many Yes covers.
No, that is a shit album cover. Richard, what were you going to say? Sorry,
I honestly don't see what all the fuss was about in terms of the Born Again cover.
No,
I mean
no, nor me.
It's a devil baby. Presumably, it fits in with the title track. So yeah, I honestly can't see what all the fuss is about.
Okay, well, Born Again moves into Steve will say another banger, Hotline. Do you know what? The reason that I don't include this as one of the album's better songs is because, and I'm with Richard here, Ian Gillan spends so much time at the absolute screechy end of his range that it by the end of it just pisses me off. It really does. I'm my finger is always hovering over the skip button. Sometimes you just think, stop, just bloody stop screaming.
It's this kind of Lusitania Express moment, isn't it?
Yeah,
I love this.
Yeah,
despite everything I said. Yes, I just love this. I mean, there's shades of Deep Purple again. Great, groovy, powerful driving riff. As you say, the bass line is phenomenal in this. You said earlier, Mark, about when they'd finished watching him, Gillan record Keep It Warm. I could imagine them watching in disbelief as he belted Hotline out. What a vocal performance. Yes, he is. He's at that high end of the range, but this is the track of the album for me. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah. Get in there.
Well, I've got no issue with the music at all. I mean, it crushes. It's so good. The riff and everything you've said, absolutely. Just, I would say 80% of Gillan's vocal performance is brilliant. But that 20% where it's just like shattering glass. Yeah, fair play to the. I mean, yeah, he can crank a note. There's no doubt about that. But oh my god, just hurt my ears. Anyway, what doesn't hurt my ears is "Keep It Warm," which I just think is just a fantastic close to the album. It's just fantastically kind of relentless. It just keeps coming at you, doesn't it? Gillan's actually emoting in this, which I think is always a kind of a magic moment on any album where he gets to do some of this. So I can understand why Bill Ward would have looked at this and gone, that's just amazing, because it is, and just a fantastic close to the album.
I'm not so bothered about this one. I really like Iommi's chords. I think, again, an amazing Butler bass line. But I found it a bit forgettable. And actually, isn't it funny? I find this more dirgy than the title track.
That's interesting. I found it a little bit southern rock at the start. I'm with Richard. I'm a bit more lukewarm than Keep It Warm. I do love that there's a little injection of pace from Ward and Butler midway through that solo that's very clever and just kind of picks it up, but then they grind it back again, slow it all down, plods, and it's heavy, but I'm with Richard on this. It's kind of okay.
All right, so highs and lows, people. Steve?
Well, if we're marking Stonehenge...
No, we're not.
Okay, well, Born Again then, from that end of the scale. The highs, I'll tell you what, it's that double act at the end of side one, and I'm going to give it to Disturbing the Priest.
Richard?
So my low will be Digital Bitch, and my high, as just mentioned, Hotline.
Okay, my low is also Digital Bitch, and my high is also... Disturbing the Priest. I think in the end I gave to Ron Zero the Hero, but that side one takes them beating. I think that's going to be quite interesting when we come to score it, see where that ends up in the Hall of Fame, because I suspect it's going to be higher than pretty much anybody would have bet for it. But we'll see. We'll see when we get there. It's time to move on by, 7 years to, the rodents from the west coast of America, from deep in LA. It's Ratt. And their fifth album, Detonator. Steve.
Yes, Detonator, Ratt's fifth album. Sixth if you include the EP, but we don't, so fifth album. I cannot begin to describe the apprehension I felt when I bought this back in the day. Bought on face value, inevitably, as an unashamed Ratt fan, no questions asked. Just went out and bought it as soon as they come out, regardless of reviews. Although actually the reviews for this were quite positive, I seem to recall. But after the horror of album 3, Dancing Undercover, I know we've got different views on that. I don't like it. And the abject misery of album 4, Reach for the Sky, which I think we're both pretty much agreed on. I think we were buying this more through hope than expectation, Mark, I guess.
Yeah, so maybe some loyalty.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, which was never misplaced. I had no issue with that. And so initially you slap it on, you're greeted by a track that, as I say, would sit, this is Shame, would happily sit on a Ratt's Greatest Hits album, as far as I'm concerned. It's that good. And I love it. And there are definitely more highs on this than lows, but it ain't Out of the Cellar, let's make that clear. It ain't Invasion of Your Privacy. It's not even close. And I kind of knew that at the time, but what has happened over time, certainly over the first few years of owning this, is I kind of started to accept it for what it was, which you're going to have to, aren't you? You're going to have to stop trying to make those comparisons, because it's clearly going to, fail on that level if you're trying to compare it with Out of the Cellar, for example. And it grew on me anyway. It did grow on me. There's no two ways about it. There's still a couple of tracks on here I could happily never hear again, but only 2. That's a massive improvement on how I initially felt, and it's also a massive improvement on Reach for the Sky, where about half the album's shite. So, but there's still a couple of tracks on here that I'm just not bothered about. So I've gone back to Detonator over the last couple of weeks and listened to it in its entirety for the first time in yonks. Shame, as I say, I'm one step away, a playlist mainstays, and have been for years. I adore them. One's not very Ratt, but I just love it. And I've gone back to it, and I'm loving the whole thing. Kind of wondering what I didn't get. Forget the obvious tracks. There's a couple of absolute bangers on here, which I didn't think were bangers at the time. And I'm not talking about Shame, because I did. There's a couple on here that, do you know what? I just thought, have I forgotten that they were on here? I can't wait to talk about them. So I'm kind of still learning about this album, which is madness, isn't it? Because it's been, out for 30 odd years.
Opening album sleeve notes.
And it was released on August 21st, 1990 on Atlantic, 42 minutes, 12 seconds long. The producer was Desmond Child. And that, of course, was the big gig here, because he not only helped produce it, but he pretty much wrote all of the songs. So it's been Desmond Childed. And that's a distinct style, and it's not Ratt, put it that way. And that's so we've got it's a very different sounding album because of his greasy paw prints all over it. Several studios were used: Music Grinder, Lion's Share, and Microplant, all in LA, obviously. Previous album, as I say, Reach for the Sky. The next album, well, This, of course, was the breakup album. The next album was Ratt, which the kind of fans called 1999, so as not to be confused with Ratt, the EP. That came out in 1999. Clues are there, which was 9 years later. But this is the last album with the classic Ratt lineup of Stephen Pearcy on vocals, Warren DeMartini on guitar, Robin Crosby, the late Robin Crosby, who died a couple of years after. Well, he died in 2000, but he was very, very ill during the making of this, on rhythm guitar. Poin Crucier on bass guitar, and Bobby Blotzer, the Blots, on drums. Reached 55 in the UK rock charts, 23 in the US, went gold in the States. And it has 11 tracks on it, but the first one is merely the intro to Shame, 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 followed by Loving You Is a Dirty Job, Scratch That Itch. And if I say those two very quickly, that's how much I can, then you can forget them as quickly as I have. One Step Away and Hard Time. And then on side 2, Heads I Win, Tails You Lose, All or Nothing, Can't Wait on Love, Giving Yourself Away, Shakes Head, and Top Secret. That's the track listing on Detonator. Warren DeMartini said the timing of this album worked against it. 1990. We know what 1990 was all about. He said had it followed Dancing Undercover and come out in 88, it would have been a slightly different thing. That the rock world had shifted on its axis by 1990, and stunts like Detonator were harder to pull off by then. I would counter that if it's a good album, it can come out any time and do well, if I'm honest. So let's not blame the onset of grunge for this. An album lives and dies by how good it was, as far as I'm concerned. And basically, I think this is a decent enough album. It's much better than the previous 2 albums. It's not as good as Out of the Cellar and Invasion of Your Privacy. And there's me saying I'm not going to make any comparisons. I've just done it again. But that's where I sit with Detonator. Now, who to come to first? Fanboy like me or Richard? Richard.
This has really grown on me through this listening. You can really see the impact of Desmond Child on this, can't you? And we'll talk about the comparisons and the sound alikes as we go. But there's also, I think, some real classic Ratt on here. It is a bit up and down, but a few of these tracks, yeah, really, really good. And I think amongst the best the band have done. So yeah, I've enjoyed it.
So you prefer it to Out of the Cellar then? I'm guessing that straight away.
I don't think it's far away.
Mark?
Okay, so where am I with this? I was up late one night in 1990 and I was watching some stuff on TV. Might even have been MTV, I have no idea. But the video for Loving You Is a Dirty Job came on, and my God, they're having some fun in that video, let me tell you. And there are lots of girls in it, lots of water and lots of bikinis. And, I was sold. And I think, Steve, you and I are going to disagree quite a lot over the next 20, 25 minutes. Not because I think we've reached different conclusions about the album as a whole, although I don't think it's quite as good as I think you think it is, but on the individual tracks. So I think we've probably reached the same point, but by different routes. This is certainly better than Reach for the Sky. I'm far more tolerant and far more forgiving and far more affectionate towards Dancing Undercover than you are. I think that, for me, has improved over time as an album, because, like you, I didn't like it much when it came out. But I think there are some great tracks on here, certainly very good tracks on here. I think there's an awful lot of filler. Overall, I just feel like this is Ratt with incisors blunted and tails docked. It's not really Ratt. It hasn't got the swagger, and it hasn't got the sass, and it doesn't have the sleaze, and it doesn't have other things beginning with S, but it does have a little bit of shit. And all in all, as a 1990 album for a glam metal band out of LA, it's a decent enough effort. I think there are moments on here where I want to put Desmond Child up against a wall, and because he's turned the band in places into Bon Jovi, and I'm not talking 1986 version Bon Jovi, I'm talking 1988 version Bon Jovi, and that's not a good thing. So I kind of feel like it's a step up from Reach from the Sky. I quite like a lot of it, and I don't much care for quite a lot of it.
He was so determined to make it sound like Bon Jovi that he actually brought John Bon Jovi in, didn't he, for one of the tracks? But I think we all agree, kind of. I just think maybe our marks per track by track may change, but I think we're all ultimately in agreement. I don't think I'm majorly impressed with it, but I do like it. I have to say, I do like it.
One
So yeah, 6 tracks on side 1. 5, as I say, 5. Shame is the intro into Shame, Shame, Shame. And side 1 is such a mix for me. 2 absolute bangers, as I've explained or articulated. Shame, Shame, Shame. One Step Away, sandwiching a pair of tracks which, hand on heart, I had absolutely no time for when this first came out and got me so irritated. I thought Loving You's a Dirty Job was just such a horrible sop to the record company in search of that big glam hit. It was just utterly shameless. And Scratch That Itch wasn't a lot better. That's grown on me, funnily enough. I'm still very indifferent to Was Loving You. When you listen to Loving You, that's where you see Desmond Child's mitts all over this. And I don't think Ratt benefit from it particularly. So that's my view. That's my overview on side 1. I don't know whether you got... Finishes off, by the way, with Hard Time, which is a kind of throwback to old school Ratt. But anyway, Shame, Shame, Shame. The opener. What do you think, boys?
Yeah, it's a good start, isn't it? There's a real swagger in Percy's voice. There's always just something a little bit different about them, isn't there? The funky guitar riff, and there's some variety. I love the drop into the bridge and it's up again. Really nice little licks from DeMartini throughout. I think there are tracks where they're allowed to be classic Ratt, and this is one of them.
This is one of them, yeah. Dirty, isn't it?
I agree with that. And dirty in a good way. This is classic Ratt. This could go on any one of their albums. It may be a bit too polished for Out of the Cellar, but certainly there's an argument to say it would sound all right on Invasion. I mean, I think they share lead guitar duty in this, don't they? DeMartini and Crosby. But the guitars are the star of the show on it. There's no doubt about that. And the guitar solo, don't know who, I think it's Crosby, but I could be wrong. Just wonderful, wailing guitar solo. Fantastic.
Crosby, to be fair, was barely at the races here. He was so ill, but he still manages to drive it along, doesn't he? And yeah, and Richard's right to mention that those DeMartini fills and runs, because they crop up all the time throughout this. They're a constant throughout this album, as they were throughout, his career with Ratt. Loving You's a Dirty Job, though. That's immediately issue. Immediately, I've got a red flag. Back in there, I just thought they were sort of regurgitating some of the stuff off the previous 2 albums. It's not grown on me. It's not great. It's brash glam. Band like Aerosmith would have done it a lot better. It's just not for Ratt. There, I've said it.
So the fact I like it, and not only do I like it, but I really like the phonic mix version of it.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
I know I'm a heathen. Like I say, this was the lead single, I think, on the album.
Yeah, it was.
It's the first time I came across it. I quite like it. I think it's funky, and I think it's got a fantastic sort of heavy riff on it. Yes, it's Desmond Child, and yes, it's a sop to the record company. I get all that, but that's where they were in 1990. And if they are going to have to compromise a bit and write stuff like this or record stuff like this, then this is a decent enough track as far as I'm concerned.
I agree with Mark, Steve.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
It's a really good track too.
Yeah.
You got that opener, and this just settles the whole album down into a really good groove. I think Piercy's voice in this is really... I love the husk and the croak and the attitude still in his voice. Good thump to it. Good sing-along chorus. So, yeah, I'm happy with this one.
Yeah, as I said, I'd have been happy if it was done by another band. Not for me. I'd have switched it with Scratch That Itch, which, again, I didn't like particularly, but when I first heard it, that's grown on me a lot, Scratch That Itch, I must admit. And it's the little things, isn't it? That pre-chorus, just a few seconds where they kind of go back to Cellar or Invasion. DeMartini's solo isn't the best. I know it's him on lead in that.
There's some bits of classic Ratt in here, particularly the phrasing and the notes in Piercy's lines. That could be right on Out of the Cellar, but the rest of it, it's okay. Nice strong finish. Yeah. But I prefer the first 2.
The verses, I love the verses. These are classic Ratt. The phrasing, the melody in it, absolutely. It's 100% Ratt. And then we get into a very pedestrian chorus. But yeah, this is a step down for me, I'm afraid. But the Blot's going at it like a motherfucker.
He is. Yeah, the engine room's still cranking it up. The interesting... I thought it needed resuscitating the album at this stage, having initially... As I say, I've wanted to Scratch That Itch, but not to Loving You. But the interesting thing about One Step Away, which is the next track, is that it's the most un-Ratt song to breathe life into an album. But it does. It's an unlikely corker. This is Ratt going down a kind of, almost a Bon Jovi avenue with melody, catchiness.
What do you mean, almost?
It's so hooky.
This is a formulaic Desmond Child track. This,
Yeah, it is.
it's over poppy, it's formulaic, but I do like it.
Yes, yeah, guilty pleasures. It's true.
Even the fade out at the end of the song
Yes.
is Desmond Child.
I wrote 3 letters in the first word. Yuck. This is so late 80s hair metal. Fuck me.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
But no, but it's Tom Petty without the cool. It is just so anodyne. It's not true. You two.
Oh my God.
I don't know what you're on.
I've loved this for
This
I've
is
loved
awful.
this for
No,
years.
fucking awful song, Steve.
I'm not feeling guilty. You're not going to shame me. I don't give a shit. In fact, when the show's over, I'm going to put it on repeat till I go to sleep.
It's not as Bon Jovi as another another track.
No,
Here.
we'll come to that in a second. But let's just finish off side one with Hard Time, which
Yeah,
I like.
right. Well, thank
no.
God.
It's the two side closers. This one is this could have sat on Cellar quite happily, as far as I'm concerned. Hard Time, probably somewhere at the back end of side 2. Let's not over elevate it. And it's a song that drives, and that's what all the best Ratt songs did, didn't they? They drove.
Yeah,
it's a mean little cussed fucker, for want of a better word.
You're so articulate.
It's going to beat your heart out.
And it's Blotzer's contribution to Ratt in terms of his rhythms. Blotzer's use of the ride cymbal really lifts. That's what it really makes a difference about Ratt songs. And uses it a lot here.
the best Ratt tracks are the tracks where Blotzer's driving it. So if you listen to, for example, Lay It Down, that song works because of the drums as much as anything else. And there's so many tracks that they did that absolutely rely on Bobby Blotzer, and this is one of them. I think I love this track. I think it's great. I think it's the best track on the album.
Okay, yeah. Well, it's not, but you're right. It's one of the better ones on the album, certainly. Side 2, there's a nosedive initially. 5 tracks. First one's Heads I Win, Tails You Lose. There's the threat of a quite decent verse or two, but it just descends into a sort of Poison-esque chorus. I mean, Pierce's gravelly vocals will only ever make this sound like a Ratt song, but it's a bit tame.
This is the Bon Jovi song on the album, isn't it? It's the Desmond Child. Well done, Des. You've managed to turn a very good band into John Bon Jovi's clone. Fantastic.
Yeah.
This is awful. I'm just it's just Ratt light.
Yes.
Awful.
Yeah.
It does, however, get an entry on ultimatecowbell.com.
Very good.
A bit of cowbell in this. Not a high score, 3.19482.
Next up is All or Nothing, which is it's much better. And why is it better? It's better because Crosby was central to the writing of it, and he understood what Ratt were. He was a big songwriter in the early days, and had very little to do on this album for obvious reasons. He wasn't well, but he understood the band, and this is a better Ratt track as far as I'm concerned. All or Nothing. DeMartini's solo is superb. Backing vocals from someone called Miriam Val, which is merely anecdotes of no interest. Doesn't add anything. But the song itself is good. It's really good. I mean, Crosby wasn't prominent enough on Detonator because he was off his face. But when he was asked, his impact was obvious in a track like this.
I disagree. This, for me, is an Aerosmith clone. This is Ragdoll that's lost some stuffing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what it is.
That's not necessarily an insult, is it? You do well to write anything as good as Ragdoll, but Ragdoll light.
No, it's shit, Steve.
Jesus, if we come to the same marks, the three of us, after this conversation, I'll be astonished.
Hold on, I've just got to do something. Just bear with me for one moment. Just bear with me. Oh, I thought maybe Desmond Child had co-written Ragdoll, but actually he didn't. He co-wrote Hearts Done
Of course,
Time
he was all over
and,
Permanent Vacation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
he was.
Dude
Yeah,
looks
yeah.
like a lady, but he didn't write Ragdoll. But he must have heard it because I think he's borrowed quite a lot.
Brilliant. Well, anyway, Ragdoll talk aside, Can't Wait on Love, track 3 on side 2. Suitably sleazy with that sort of crunching Ratt riff, not bad at all. DeMartini earns his corn again. Solos and runs and bridges and fills and bits everywhere. I like it. I can't deny it. And why would I?
It's fascinating. This is one that I think is, I've just written here, more Bon Jovi anyone? I find this pretty average.
Yeah. I've only scored it above average, but I kind of think that's okay. I'm not shooting my load over it. Don't get me wrong. Not that you need to know that.
That's such a rat and roll thing to say.
I think I don't want to know when you are.
No, I don't think anybody needs to know that. Funny enough, I think the chorus is very Bon Jovi, but I don't think the verses are. I think the verses, that's quite a cool riff going on there.
Yeah, I agree. A Rat riff.
It's I think it is. It's a good Rat riff. And I think this is better than most of this side. I have to say, just for that riff, because at least there's some beef in it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we're missing quite a lot of beef from this album as a whole, I think.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And there is still some beef to come. But before we get to that, we need to talk about Giving Yourself Away. Shakes his head in desperation once more. This would have sat nicely on one of Ratt's other albums, like, say, Slippery When Wet or New Jersey. The point is, Pearcy cannot sing this type of shit, so why make him? You know, this is not for him. And if it's not for him, it's not a Rat song, as far as I'm concerned. It's it's not an awful tune. It's just so lame. From a band who were all about edge. There's no edge in this at all. It's awful.
We've already, name-checked Bon Jovi and Aerosmith. I think this is the kind of song that Desmond Child would have reserved for Bonnie Tyler.
Yes.
I quite like his voice on this, though.
Actually,
yeah, usually
Well, it sounds more like Warren Zevon when he's on the lower register.
Yeah.
Fucking Werewolves of London. This is fucking shit. It really is. It is awful. And this is the problem with the album. So it goes from somewhere quite up here to way down here. The albums that have done well in the podcast are the ones that have got that median line, and some of the tracks are just below it, some of the tracks are just above it, but it's pretty much all the way through on the line. This is it's like a bathtub graph. It goes from massive highs to massive lows and back up again. It's the world's worst roller coaster.
And the band clearly weren't at their best coming into it. I mean, Pearcy's admitted as much after years on the road and that. Crosby ill, very ill. They were pretty fucked up, all five of them, I think. And he had this lovely quote: "You can only do so much when you're given only 4 coloured pencils and told to create the universe." You know, he was basically saying, that the record company had just shafted him. You know, they said they wanted an album that they didn't know how to do. Really, it wasn't in their ballpark.
Well, they were barely on speaking terms at this point, were they? It was a miracle they got them into the studio. Frankly,
yeah. But luckily, what I would say is that the last track that Ratt ever did in this 5-piece, is an absolute gem, I think. This is the one, Top Secret. It's a goodie. It's a real, real goodie. It's mean, Crosby kicking it on, DeMartini, all those little fills and bits. Pearcy at his gravelly best, and an ace chorus. This is old school. I just adore it. A track this good should not be left to the end of the album. Better than that. Should replace Lovin' You's a Dirty Job.
I wonder if this had been around for a while. It does sound like an old song, doesn't it? Maybe they just rediscovered that mojo for one song.
Oh, it's a great song. Yeah, if you listen, it's all going on. It's classic Ratt going on in there.
Yep.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Tell us you hate it, Richard.
No, I don't hate it at all. I think I agree that it is more classic Ratt, but I wouldn't say it's a good song.
Do you think we're just desperate for it to be good? I mean, genuinely, I do wonder whether we are, particularly Steve and I, for obvious reasons, whether we are really want it to be good, and it just hasn't been largely.
No.
Well, after giving yourself away, you just please
anything you'll
before
do.
you go.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Anyway, there you go. That's Detonator. Highs and lows. Richard?
Giving Yourself Away is my low, and it's between One Step Away and Loving You's a Dirty Job. And just to piss you off, Steve, I'm going to give it to Loving You.
Oh dear, I can shoulder these brickbats. Don't worry about that. You do what you want, bastard.
Yeah, Giving Yourself Away is the low, and Hard Time. I think Hard Time's just fab. Really do.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, no, I'm with you on Giving Yourself Away, which just about as that or Loving You's a Dirty Job. And shame for me. It's a great way to start the album. Shame the rest of it didn't follow suit. There you go. That's Ratt. That's Detonator. That's the second album of episode 76. So we move forward another 5 years, and if that's divided opinion, well, I don't know. I don't know where opinions are now going to go, but we are moving forward, as I say, 5 years to Van Halen and Balance. Richard.
Yes, it's Balance. Van Halen's Balance, recorded in 1995. Some background. I mean, there's a lot of commentary about the front cover of the album and the Siamese conjoined twins on a seesaw and what that might mean given the mood of the band at the time. But I always find if you flip the cover over and look at the photograph on the back of the album, that says even more. What you've got on the photograph on the back of the album is the Van Halen brothers striding out in the sunshine. But behind them, Mike and Anthony is walking in a shadow. And you can barely see Sammy Hagar because he's hidden behind entirely. And if ever there was a picture that captured the mood in a band, that was it. Let's come back to more of that in a second, do some facts and figures.
Opening album sleeve notes.
Yeah, it's their 10th studio album, Van Halen, and but it was their last with Sammy Hagar. It was recorded between May and September 1994, released very beginning of 1995 on Warner Brothers Records. Where else? Lengthwise, we're reviewing the vinyl version, as we always do. It's a shade over 49 minutes in length. The CD had an extra track. Producer-wise, they got in Bruce Fairbairn to challenge them and perhaps push them in some different directions. It was recorded at Eddie Van Halen's own studios, and then vocals and various other bits and pieces at Fairbairn Studios up in Vancouver. So yeah, album-wise, For an Awful Carnal Knowledge preceded this, and as this was the last album with Hagar, the next album was the awful Van Halen 3, where they got Gary Cherone in. Personnel-wise, so it's the core of Van Halen, Michael Anthony on bass, Alex Van Halen drums, and Edward Van Halen on guitar, keyboards, and then Sammy Hagar on vocals. I mean, US-wise, it did huge. It went huge. I mean, it went triple platinum, went to number one. So, it didn't dent their popularity over there. UK-wise, it did okay. It got to number 8 in the UK charts. And the tracks, well, again, a bit like we've just discussed with Born Again, there's some funny little interludes. And so apart from that, the album is actually 9 tracks in length. But overall, with these 2 little interludes on the vinyl, at least, it adds up to 11. All tracks written by the band collectively, and side 1 is The Seventh Seal, Can't Stop Loving You, Don't Tell Me What Love Can Do, Amsterdam, Big Fat Money, and then this little interlude at the end called Doing Time. And then side 2, Aftershock, little interlude called Strung Out, Then Not Enough, Take Me Back, and Feeling. So that's the facts and figures. And to come back to the environment, the frictions were starting to show, whether that had anything to do with Eddie Van Halen's newly found sobriety or potentially the death of their long-term manager, Ed Leffler, who died of cancer a year or so earlier. But sort of things weren't great, particularly between Sammy Hagar and Eddie Van Halen. Sammy Hagar, he joked in an interview I saw, basically, I never get my way in this band and I'm sick of it. He said it with a big smile on his face and laughing, but you can't help but think that that was actually sort of the undercurrent of what was going on. For me, there is some really, I think, quite grown up Van Halen on this. And when, Mark, you played this to me, and I instantly really connected with a few of the tracks. I think there's some really good, mature songwriting on this, but also there are some songs that really should not be on this album, on any Van Halen album. But I still like it, and I've enjoyed listening to it again. And I think there are a couple of tracks that are best that they've done with Hagar, and are up there with some of the best they even did with Roth. But I'd be interested in your opening comments. Most of all, Stevens.
It's interesting, isn't it, when you talk about some of the battles that have to be won within these bands, and they're only ever won by the Van Halen brothers, aren't they? If you think of Roth, Templeman, and obviously Anthony and Hagar, I dare say others. Yeah, no, it's interesting what you think. I mean, truth of the matter is, by this stage, I had no real interest in what Van Halen were up to, because they were so far removed from, the first instalment of the band that, no animosity, just no interest, really. And so this to me is a bit like Born Again, in as much as this is so far removed from the Van Halen I loved, in the same way that Born Again, to Sabbath fans presumably, is so many light years away from paranoid, say, that they could probably look at that quite objectively, and that's kind of where I am with this. I'm just listening to a hard rock album, which contains, some good stuff and some pants, it has to be said, but, a lot of interesting stuff done by a band who just happened to share the name of another band I used to love in the early 80s. I mean, there are one or two real lows on here. This is the whole point, potentially very low, and they get low marks ordinarily, but then you listen to the track again. But when you kind of forensically listen to them and then listen, we're in the company of genius here, aren't we? Whatever you say, EVH would do things to a track that can transform it, from what seems initially pretty shit. He'll do things. And that'll add half a mark or more onto tracks. But, in the hands of Lesser Mortals, some of these tracks would be very, very forgettable. With his lightness of touch, they're a little bit better than that. It's not for me. Both sides start off with an absolute banger, and both sides drop off. But listen, I've tried to listen to it as a piece of work rather than anything Van Halen-ish, and it's okay. It's okay.
Sounds like my opening comment about Ratt or Born Again. My opening comment about Born Again. Mark.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? The dynamic of the band has a lot to do with the sound of this album, which neither you nor I would have appreciated back in the day. So this is a band that is totally at odds with one another. There's a huge schism. You've got the Van Halen boys on one side of the room, Michael Anthony and Sammy Hagar on the other. As you say, Steve, there's only going to be one winner in that fight, and Michael Anthony and Sammy Hagar depart to form Chickenfoot. But through this conflict, which is largely driven by Eddie Van Halen's drinking problem and Hagar's absolute lack of, or his patience has run out with it. I don't think he was intolerant of it to begin with. I think he was sympathetic, but there comes a point where the work ethic suffers, and I think Hagar had just got to the end of his tether, and there was a massive conflict between the two of them. But out of this comes this amazing burst of creativity, because this is a very different Van Halen album. I think they achieve in this album something they can't achieve as a group of human beings, hence the name of the album and the image on the front of the cover. And these are conjoined people, Anthony and Hagar, the Van Halen boys, they're conjoined, and I think they're trying to find some unity that they can't find in their own social dynamic. And I think that's where you get the grown-up Van Halen from, because this is a much more grown-up album. If you do what Steve does and you say, right, I'm just going to judge this as a hard rock album that happened to come out in 1995, then I think when you judge it on its own merits, I think it's got a lot going for it. I don't think it's as good as I thought it was 30 years ago, but equally, I still think there are elements of it that are bloody fantastic. I think it's a really interesting album. We often use interesting in a derogatory way. I don't in this case. I think it's a really interesting album because I think you can hear the dynamic of the band in a lot of the tracks, and then it's padded out with stuff that just shouldn't be there.
You do get from the album, the performances on the album, that they are all four of them still giving 100%. In Hagar singing, as you say, Steve, I mean, Eddie Van Halen's guitar work is just phenomenal on this. But Michael Anthony's bass, and of course, Alex is there being Alex, so that's fine.
Yeah. I'm not sure Hagar has ever sounded better on a Van Halen album because he's singing an octave lower, much more in his range. There's a lot of squealing going on in the earlier albums, which you don't get in this one. So I think there's a lot to commend this album.
Commendable. That's a good opening statement. All right, well, let's do side one. 6 tracks, 5 real songs. So the Seventh Seal, all about sort of God and cheating death. Can't Stop Loving You, very much sort of Hagar staple. Don't Tell Me What Love Can Do, a lighter song that then became darker. A song about Amsterdam and getting stoned. A rock and roll song called Big Fat Money. And then this a little percussive interlude called Doing Time. It starts a bit weird with didgeridoo and wind chimes, but then you just get the classic Alex Van Halen drums, and then this amazing bass foundation from Anthony, chopping guitar from Eddie, and then these big vocals from Hagar. I mean, it really is a wall of sound. I think it's a cracker, and it's mature, it's confident, and one of the best songs they did with Sammy Hagar. I think it's a corker.
Echo everything you said. That sort of Buddhist chanting, some bells. The fact that Eddie's wearing a goatee. This is the height of alt rock, post grunge, and you're fearing the worst with that start. But there's nothing to worry about at all because it just goes into this absolute stonker. It's sort of like a cross between Aerosmith and Zeppelin. It's just got such a groove to it, and it rocks. Yeah. And it really rocks. You know, I mean, all right, it's not the Van Halen I remember with fondness and love, but wow. Great start.
Do you know the story of the Seven Seals? Because this is a song about the end of days. So the Seven Seals, don't say you never learn anything on this podcast, right? 7 seals were proclamations by God. The first seal revealed the devil, the Antichrist, riding on a white horse. Everybody thought he had come to bring peace to the land, but of course he hadn't. Seal 2 revealed war, and a great war raged across the land. Seal 3 revealed famine, riding a black horse, and Seal 4 revealed death with Hades riding behind him. The 5th seal identified the martyrs who would be rewarded for their faith in the Lamb of God, Jesus Christ, when they died. Seal 6 was essentially a massive earthquake that caused the sun to turn black and the moon to turn red, and for the heavens to roll back like a scroll. And the mountains and the islands were removed from their place, and the people who survived it ran to caves and survived there. And the 7th seal was the end of days, Armageddon, which brought to an end the First Testament. So who broke the 7th seal? That's what this song's all about. It's about the end of days. It's about the end of time and history as we know it. Because Hagar was a bit upset with what was going on in the world.
You didn't want to write a song about knobs then, obviously.
No.
Steve, you'd better open the bidding on track 2 then. My first line on my notes is bet Steve loves this. meant sarcastically.
Yeah. My first line is a better why can't this be love? I don't it's not amazing. Do not get me wrong. It's very cheesy and it's very derivative. But what I would say is that there's some sparkle in here. If other bands would never manage. This is what I was talking about with Eddie Van Halen. And they manage it because of him. It's incredibly formulaic, yes. Listen to it. If you don't know it, listen to it carefully. There are some delicious little bits and pieces going on, just fills and runs, just enough to elevate this from the bog standard. It's unashamedly catchy. And I'll never criticise any band, especially Van Halen, for being catchy, for fuck's sake. I gave Jump 10. I'd have given it 11 if I could. No, I like it. There's something about it. I really like. A bittersweet song about the deterioration of Sammy's marriage, wasn't it? I don't know. There's something about it. It's a better why can't this be love? There you go. I'll leave it at that.
It's not the only song on this album about Sammy Hagar's marriage and his divorce. I don't hate this song. I hate myself for liking it because it is my guilty pleasure. I should not like this song. It shouldn't be here. It really shouldn't be here.
It's in every rose has its thorn.
Infuriatingly fucking catchy. No, every rose that has its thorn, I cannot give house room to, and certainly not Headspace. But it's just infuriatingly catchy, and I really like it. And I hate myself for liking it. I feel grubby.
Join the club, Mark. Join the club, my friend.
This is a dip for a second song. I think Don't Tell Me should have been song 2, because just when I'd finished listening to the 7th seal, I was thinking, yes, right, this is the kind of Van Hagar that I want. It then goes back to the Van Hagar that I don't want.
Can I ask a question? Where the fuck are the guitars? You can't hear them at all on this song. Well, you do a little bit.
Yeah, a few little picky bits from Eddie, aren't there?
Yeah.
All right. Well, then Don't Tell Me is track 3. I think this is fantastic. It's another highlight. I love the powerful, really choppy riffs. I think this has got a superb vocal performance from Sammy Hagar. Originally, it was written as another celebration of love, but Eddie suggested that the lyric was changed, the mood was changed. They wanted a bit more attitude. Sammy Hagar didn't particularly like doing that, but as we said, the Van Halens won out. Actually, I'm with them. I think this is a grown-up, moody, attitude-rich, very powerful song. I like it a lot.
It's about Kurt Cobain, isn't it? And his suicide, and the fact that if somebody had been there, if the love people had from him had been enough, he'd still be alive today. Yeah, this is a fantastic track, I think. Really, really strong. Really strong.
Hagar's heart wasn't in this, and nor's mine. He said that song. He liked the song. He said that didn't take us anywhere, and I know why now. It's obviously written later. He said it wasn't what Van Halen fans wanted. It showed the darkness of Van Halen, and it was basically the end of the band. That's his take on this one song alone. How about that? That's damning.
Yeah, I know.
And I get that. It's too long for me. It's too dirgy. It doesn't play to Hagar's strengths, I don't think, vocally. And it's Van Halen trying to be alternative, Eddie trying to be mature. And this is the band that gave us Ice Cream Man, for fuck's sake. It's also, it's 6 minutes long. It's too long. It's not for me. This is
Steve.
I don't like it.
Steve. People can change. People can change.
Yeah, no, I get that. I don't mind Eddie wanting to grow up. Trust me. I just don't want him trying to do it in songs.
All right. So the last two tracks on side one are Amsterdam, followed by Big Fat Money. I mean, let's talk about these as a pair because for me, it's a drop. I think Amsterdam really starts with promise. It's got a real groove, but then I really don't like the wham bam chorus. I think Eddie said he regretted the shallow subject matter and started slagging off Sammy Hagar for his chorus. In his newfound sobriety, he wanted to write deeper songs. But I mean, Amsterdam I can tolerate as being on this album, but Big Fat Money I can't. I mean, it's a bit of rock and roll. It's a Long Tall Sally ripoff. And I just think, why the hell did you include this track?
Okay, well, dealing with the two of them, Amsterdam, it's about getting stoned on the most potent fucking weed that you can get in Amsterdam. It's called Amsterdam, isn't it? But first of all, let me say this is one of the tracks that shouldn't be on this album because it is quite shallow. So I think you either you've got an album that you want that is dealing with kind of quite serious stuff, or has grown up. Yeah. And I don't know what Eddie Van Halen's talking about because I was listening to it. I was thinking, is that just coincidence or is that really clever, right? Because one of the lyrics is "Score me some Panama Red," right? And then it drops in to the biggest caricature of the Panama riff that you can possibly imagine. So is it just really clever and that it's almost like a little motif and a little wink and an in-joke, or is it just a coincidence? So Amsterdam, I quite like, shouldn't be there. Big Fat Money. You know how we talk about vocalists being dragged along by the hair? This is one of those. He cannot keep up. It's an absolute dog's breakfast, and it is my absolute low on the album.
Well, that's interesting. I agree with you. I like the way you lumped them both together, Richard, because that's exactly how I felt when I first heard it. Didn't like the first and don't like the second. Musically, I don't mind Amsterdam quite so much, but I don't mind. I disagree with what you say, Mark, about it doesn't feel right for the album. I mean, it's it doesn't have to be a serious album through and through, does it? It is Van Halen when all's said and done. So I don't mind seeing the lighter side of them, but I love the fact that he said the lyrics weren't his words weren't metamorphical enough. Fucking metamorphical. A bloke who spent a decade working with Diamond Dave, by the way, now wants metamorphical. But anyway, I don't like either. So I'm absolutely with you on that.
Yeah, and then as an afterthought, the side finishes with "Doing Time," which is just a bit of percussion and Alex Van Halen mucking around. And let's flip the album over. 5 actual tracks, 4 proper songs. On side 2, starts with Aftershock, then this little strung out pointless interlude. Their ballad, Not Enough, Take Me Back, and the album closes with a slightly longer, right, it'd be interesting to what you two think, but I think a little bit of a mini epic in feeling. Right, Aftershock. Yeah, another banger, Steve, eh?
Top draw, yeah, love it. One of the tracks of the album for me, as I said before, love the bass line, love that dancing bass line through this. You associate with Michael Anthony with sort of beating his bass up, but he's making it sing here, and doubtless to get a herd over the Van Halen boys. There's a groove to this, isn't there? And it's meaty and it's beefy, and it's there's a solo. I love the solo over Anthony and Alex are just driving it along, and there's a solo over the top. Oh, great song, great start.
Well, Sammy may have wanted to get out of his marriage to the Van Halen brothers, but he didn't want to get out of his own marriage, did he? Because this is the second track where he's kind of lamenting the end of his union. This is great. Yeah, he got divorced in '94. He's clearly preoccupied with it. Fabulous guitar work on it. And, Eddie Van Halen, in every track, there's a moment where Eddie Van Halen goes, just in case you have forgotten who the governor is. There's some lovely guitar work in it that just underlines his genius and the fact that he is the governor in Van Halen.
Not just Van Halen. The way he makes a guitar sound is like no one else on the planet. Oh, fantastic. This was the track you played me, Mark.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah.
And I went, oh, hello.
Yes.
I want to skip past Strung Out, which is just, it just sounds like it's Eddie Van Halen trying to tune his said guitar and failing.
It's Eddie Van Halen in a rented house where there's a piano, destroying the piano, recording the sound of him destroying the piano, and then putting it on an album. That's what that is.
Yeah, and Bruce Fairbairn said yes.
Yeah. I refer you to your earlier comments, sir. When you take on the Van Halen brothers, there's only going to be one winner.
But I thought Fairbairn was bigger than that, Yeah. Anyway, it's a shit thing to do.
Well, Eddie Van Halen said he welcomed Bruce Fairbairn's involvement because it actually challenged him and put him on edge a little bit.
Exactly, and he said they get on great, and he said he likes the drive. Yeah, but anyway, this shouldn't have happened.
All right, and then we get to Not Enough. So we have piano, we have soulful vocals, we have strings. It's a beautiful song.
Yeah,
but it's not Van Halen. But I've not given it a low score. It's not a high score. It's a really, really nice, proper grown up song.
It's an average ballad. It's got an average score. This is one of his fanboys, Steve Lukather's on here, isn't he? One of his old mates, and one of those many, many guitarists who thinks he's a legend, Eddie. And he played rhythm guitar on this, didn't he? I think.
Very high score from me. I think this is one.
Has it?
Yeah. I think it's a beautiful song, and I don't think you can mark it down just because it's not Van Halen. I think it's just you mark it as the song it is, and it's a fantastic ballad.
Yeah, average ballad, average score. I'll mark it accordingly. Thank you.
A bit like giving yourself away.
Yeah.
Last couple, the songs on the album. Take Me Back is the first of those, which is kind of, I was trying to work out, how would you describe this? This is kind of 70s rock, isn't it?
Tom Petty.
Sort of middle of the road 70s rock. Yeah. I quite like it. It's got a really hooky chorus. Love the big ringing chords. I really like the two tracks that close this album. Take Me Back, and even more so Feeling. Feeling is incredibly strong finish. Builds, it falls. I love the picking guitar. Hagar's phrasing. Again, it's moody. Again, it's quite assertive. But then when it just kicks off, I love it. So yeah, Feeling is one of the songs of the album to me. So really strong finish from these two for me.
Moody's the word, isn't it? I mean, it's you talked about the maturity. It's melancholy, isn't it? I don't think this has to be the most sorrowful Van Halen album ever, doesn't it? I mean, with the two chief protagonists clearly had issues and were quite happy to sing about them and write them down, because it's pretty mournful in places. Take Me Back is. Feeling, again, I get that angst, it's there again. Eddie, he always said he loved the honesty of what sort of Nirvana and Alice in Chains and the like were doing lyrically, and always claimed he wasn't bothered about them musically, didn't he? But let's be honest, the Feeling, that's the Van Halen party's over. No, the goofballs have grown up, because it's very on them. As you say, an epic. This is a band whose trademark was 3.5 minutes. I quite like the pair of them. It's not a bad end.
I like both of them. I think Feeling is the track of the album for me. I think it's absolutely wonderful. I think he emotes beautifully on it. I just think that he gives Hagar particularly gives the performance of the album on it. I think that's a really strong finish. The other thing is that I think Feeling is elevated by that kind of the counterpoint of those choral harmonies going on in it as well. So you kind of got that mournfulness, which, because actually it's quite a hopeful. I think it's actually quite
quite a hopeful song. Chorus is quite uplifting. But then it's got that sort of very bleak choral harmony sitting in the verse, which I just think that works really well. I really like it as a song.
Okay, so you're saying that would that be your high? What about your low, Mark?
Yeah, that'd be my high. My low, Big Fat Money, easy pick.
Steve?
I tell you what, it's a real cocktail of stuff, isn't it? My low, I mean, where do you start? That's a joke. That's a joke. No, my low is my low. I'm sorry, my low is Don't Tell Me What Love Can Do. That is my low. And yeah, nothing's better than Seven Seal, Superstar. Great song.
Big Fat Money's my low, and the high would be split between, depending on what mood I'm in, Don't Tell Me and Feeling. I think I'd give it to Feeling just because of I think it really does sum up, where they'd got to in terms of growing up, in terms of that maturity, in terms of that, being more moody and I suppose adult. And it's a real pity that they couldn't take it any further.
It does sound like a farewell as well, doesn't it, that song?
Yeah.
I mean, Steve really did want us to review Van Halen with Gary Sharon, but it falls out of our 1970 to 1995 criteria.
Yeah, it's all right, Steve, because we've got another 3 Van Hagar albums to do before we. So this isn't the end.
No. Listen, I'd rather listen to 5150 than anything Gary Sharon did with Van Halen. Put it that way.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed those reviews of our 3 rediscovering the delight of albums we perhaps overlooked. We listened to Born Again by Black Sabbath and Ratt's Detonator, and then Van Halen's Balance. What we now need to do is mark them and see track by track how they contribute and then where these albums end up in the Hall of Fame.
Reviews complete. Initializing rating process.
So we started with Black Sabbath's Born Again, and that scored pretty well, actually. Steve, you gave it a 7.43 if we're rounding up. Richard, you gave it a 7.35, and I loved it. I gave it an 8.35, and it gets an average album score of 7.71429. Steve, we seem to be miles apart on Ratt. Where are we on the scores?
Well, isn't that the most extraordinary thing? The whole kaleidoscope of views. No agreement on anything. And there's 3/10 between the 3 of us. You couldn't make it up. Richard gave it 7. You gave it 7.13. I gave it 7.3. How it's got to that, I do not know. But the total score is 7.14333. Richard, Van Halen.
Yeah, a bit more variety in our scores, and I was in the middle. I with a 7.5. Steve, you were pretty much half a point lower than me on a 6.94, and Mark was pretty much half a point higher on a 7.99. That gives Van Halen an overall score of just under 7.5, then 7.477. What have we got? We're all kind of low to high sevens, so these aren't going to trouble the upper echelons of the Hall of Fame. But let's go over there now and see where they end up.
It's time to put the rock in a hard place. Opening the Hall of Fame.
All right, so here we are in Hall of Fame. We now have a grand total of 228 albums in there. Live at the Hammersmith Odeon by Nuclear Assault, Destroy the Machines by Earth Crisis still propping up the table. And we have to climb by, around 60 or so to 166 for the first of the 3 we selected for this episode. Ratt's Detonator, and they find themselves sandwiched between Marillion's Holidays in Eden and Praying Mantis with Time Tells No Lies. We climb about another 50 or so places to 117 to find Van Halen's Balance, and that got an identical score to Blackfoot's Strikes that we looked at back in episode 15. But Van Halen, due to a better top 3 track score, gets above Strikes, and it's slightly below Balls to the Wall by Accept. And the winner of this episode, and coming in a very, very respectable 69, is Born Again by Black Sabbath. That's a place above Bad Company's self-titled debut, and 1 place below South of Heaven by Slayer. That's a surprise. I mean, I scored that lowest. Well, first off, we are saying that it is a much, much better album than people give them credit for, and we're saying by this that it's nearly as good an album as South of Heaven, gentlemen.
Well, I think it's perfectly fitting that Black Sabbath should be south of heaven. That's really down to me, isn't it? So I mean, yeah, my score was the outlier, and it's skewed it. Nevertheless, as you say, Rich, I think what we are saying is that, you know, those people who've written it off and maybe not revisited it in a while, maybe just ought to go back and give it another listen and try and kind of not compare it to what went before.
Yes, it's definitely a recommended.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that wasn't too bad for Ratt, actually, given the conversation we had.
I thought it'd be the other way. As soon as we announced the albums, I thought it'd be the other way around with Balance. I thought Detonator would be above Balance. That was my initial thought, but as the marks show that, don't they? What I would say is that we've done 2 Ratt albums, Out of the Cellar, Detonator, and there's 137 places between the 2 of them. I rest my case, my lord.
Yeah, speaks volumes.
Yeah, right. So there you go. That's episode 76. 3 albums done. Into the Hall of Fame. We now need to put our minds to episode 77. We have randomly randomised, as we do, and we've come up with a theme for the next episode, which is the letter H. So the big reveal, boys. What are we doing? Richard?
Well, I've just gone for, in typical Sesame Street fashion, H is for here. Wish you were here.
Oh, okay. Another Pink Floyd album, Steve. How lucky are you?
It's only 5 tracks. I can deal with that. I mean, I know they're fucking long, but I can deal with that. Yeah. Wish you were here. Excellent. Mark, save me.
Okay, well, I am going to save you, Steve, because I'm going back to 1982, but not Northern. So I'm going for a Canadian band who you may never have heard of. They're called Headpins, and the album is called Turn It Up.
Well, that's very interesting. I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, no, I've kept it simple. I've gone for a band that begins with H. I thought that was the idea, but there you go. And mine is Hurricane from 1988 and the album Over the Edge. So there you go. Bit of late 80s. Decent pop rock for you. You'll enjoy that.
It'd be good if I could get the name of my album right, though. It's Turn It Loud, not Turn It Up. All right, well, there you go. That is episode 76 done, 77 sorted. We'll see you next week. Thanks for your company.
All music clips featured in the Enter Sad Men podcast appear within the context of criticism and or commentary, and as such are used under the fair use provisions of the exceptions to copyright rules of UK and international copyright law. To make sure the rock rolls forever on, Mark, Steve, and Rich urge all their listeners to show their love and support for the artists and writers featured on the show by purchasing the original music or subscribing to a licensed and regulated streaming service.